Alright, hey everybody, I am here to just give a good introduction to Tim McNamara. If you haven't run into Tim McNamara, he has been a staple of our market for 25, 30 years at least. If I have a question about a value or a rationale for things, he's the man I call, not he wants you to blow him up every time. But he definitely has good insight on how an effective appraisal is done. And over the years of talking about the market and talking about what's going on, I've learned a whole lot from him to where I really think I can do it, and then kind of say, and Tim endorses me. So, and that has gone a long way with people who know Tim. So anyway, without further ado, I just wanted him to give a good insight, especially to today's world of appraisers compared to how they used to be done, or for people who have lots and lots of new people in this industry for the past few years, probably have never had no appraisal training or concerns because people are just throwing money down and are going to pay it anyway. But we're starting to tighten up a little bit, and appraisals may matter and values may matter. So you being competent on most likely what will happen when someone competent does it. That's the other part we can't always predict, is 5 different appraisers can kind of come up with some interesting things at times. So anyway, Tim.
Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate it. How's everyone doing this morning? Had a great weekend of weather, huh? So, I'm hoping to learn a little bit of, from you guys today too. And so, I brought something I can talk about. It's really 4 principles of pricing a home, defending, and whether you're on the buy side or on the list side. And I'd love to run through some of that stuff, but I also want you guys to tell me what you're struggling with today, and maybe something can come from that too. So, like Sharon said, my name is Tim McNamara. I've been doing appraisals for about 30 years, and it seems like I'm still learning even today. And that's the nice thing about real estate is that every day is a little different. Someone asked me, hey, why didn't you become a commercial appraiser? Well, someone told me a long time ago, commercial appraisal was like writing term papers all the time. I'm sure you remember back in school when you had to write that 25-page paper, and that's what it was every day. Or multiple. You didn't see a lot of properties, but you worked on an assignment for 3 months when it comes to commercial. For appraising, I see multiple houses a day, so I'm able to see multiple houses, and I'm always learning, just trying to figure out how the market reacts, and that's why you'll hear from me when I call you, and I might say, hey, I'm using a pending sale. Something that you were involved in. Can you give me a little bit more information on where you are on that contract price? Did you have multiple offers? Because the best way to reflect the current market, and the market is always not perfect. I don't know if anyone's ever worked with a perfect buyer or seller, but if you have, let me know. No one's perfect out there. The agents are not perfect. The market is not perfect. The houses aren't perfect, and reactions, whether you're on the buy side or the buy side or the list side, aren't perfect. Motivations are different. So I'm constantly learning about the market, and that's what I tell agents all the time, is that if you're in this full time, you may not have 100 listings, but you can still become familiar with the market by studying the MLS, looking at what's closed in the neighborhood, what's under contract, how long did it take to sell, days on market, list to price sale ratio, the photographs, things like that. It may not be something you're specifically working on, but you want to know a little bit more about the market than study the market. But when pricing a home, it all starts with the relationship of the subject property to its neighborhood. Always starts there. Every time I do an appraisal, I'm looking at the subject property and how it relates to the subject neighborhood. And what I'm doing there is I'm trying to decide or trying to figure out, where does the subject fall within its neighborhood? Is it the largest house in the neighborhood, the smallest neighborhood? Is it a median? Is it the average house? And I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to go ahead and make a list of the range of square footage for the neighborhood, the range of site size, age built. I'm looking at the subject property and deciding, where does it fall? And then I'm also going to look at the subject prior listing histories. I'm going to look to see how the subject was absorbed in the past. Did it take a long time to sell? Did the fact that it had twice the lot size have any contribution in its sale back then? I see a lot of homeowners that during the refinance will tell me, they'll say, yeah, I've got a 3,000 square foot basement, you know, and, you know, that basement should have, you know, $150 a square foot contribution and this and that. And little do they know, they didn't really pay that much for it back when they bought the house. So the reactions of the subject or the buyer's reactions to the subject back when it's sold previously can be a good asset test to what you should experience now when you list a property, or if you're on the buy side of the property. So the relationship of the subject to its neighborhood, the prior listing exposure of the subject, how it's sold to its peers in the neighborhood is always a good way to look at how it is going to, you know, how it's going to react today, for sure. Does anyone have any questions on that? No? Okay. The second thing you have to really think about is what market are you in? Whenever you're listing a property, you have to ask yourself, what market am I in? In the first process about finding out how your subject relates to the neighborhood, you're going to pull out of that, what are the market drivers of your subject property, right? Because the market drivers of your subject property are what's going to move your price. For instance, is your house the smallest house in the neighborhood? Well, how is that going to affect the price? You know, you might find that your house, because it's the smaller house in the neighborhood, actually may sell the quickest. Because people love getting into a neighborhood at the lower price point. Hey, I bought a $400,000 house in a $1 million neighborhood, right? If your house is the largest house in the neighborhood, that's a unique feature. That's a market driver. Well, some people may not want to have the largest house in the neighborhood. Well, why spend 1.5 for this house in a neighborhood that only has houses up to $1 million? I'd rather spend 1.5 and be in a neighborhood with consistent home prices. Site size, square footage, condition, remodeling, those are market drivers that are going to be involved in your sale now. What market you're in is very important to understand this because it has a couple things to do with how you're going to do your comp selection. And what do you do with the comps that you select? So what market are you in? What would we say, what kind of market are we in today, you think? If I were to ask you, are we in a declining market? What would you say? No. Are we in a stable to upward pressure market? I think that we might define most of our neighborhoods. I think you might find that we might be in an appreciating market in certain neighborhoods, in certain price points, in certain locations in the triangle, without a doubt. And then ask yourself, so what market am I in, and what market am I coming from? The interesting thing is I put this graph together. Yep, they can see it. And if you're pricing a home and you're pulling up comps, what is the easy, if I'm doing an appraisal or you're doing a CMA, when it comes to time and date of sale, which line do you think might be the easiest?
I don't understand the chart.
Okay, that's okay. You have value here, so values going up, and time.
Okay.
So if values and time are stable, A might be the easiest market to price in because any comps you use that closed, it's reflecting the current market. Nothing's really changed. No strong external global economic conditions like a COVID or anything like that has changed the prices, right? C, and you all look much younger than I am, but
2007.
yeah. C might represent a market that we wouldn't want to forget, and that's more of the financial crisis and things like that. C is difficult to price homes in, I think, right? Right? Because you have a homeowner that says, hey, the house down the street sold for $500 here, and you're pricing home 4 months ahead, and you can't sell it for what they sold it for because the oversupply of the market and the financial crisis. So you're listing a home in a downward trend. That's tricky. Sellers don't like that. Not at all. B, and the line should probably go up like this, straight up and down when the COVID, phenomena happened, where you have a much lower interest rate environment, too few homes, too many buyers going after the same properties. This is a difficult property to price, really to appraise. Pretty easy to sell a home, difficult to appraise because of the market appreciation that was happening there. And then I kind of see the last 12 months as D. You know, D is kind of a crazy line, and that crazy line could go shift anywhere on the time side. But the bottom line is, you know, last year we had a pretty good year, and then interest rates went from 3.5% to 7% within a short time period of 3 or 4 months, and we saw some buyers back off, right? And then it was kind of difficult to look at and price homes in that trend line of interest rates going up. And I think you saw in certain spots that agents would list a home, it would sit for a while and then get reduced in price. Did everyone kind of see some reductions during the November, December, January period a little bit? I think so, at least I did. When I was doing appraisals, I saw that there was actually a history there, not 0 days on market, and a history of listing on the market, starting at a price and then being reduced, right? And the reason why they were reduced is probably because the seller's expectations were, oh, we should be able to sell this in a weekend. Mm-hmm. And then when they kind of sat, their expectations kind of softened up a little bit, and they reduced the price. It wasn't that they didn't sell; those houses did sell. It just so happened the market had to catch up to the price. What are some of the things that I look at for changes in market? How do you know when a market is changing? What are some things that you see out there? You might hear from your clients. The easiest thing is days on market. Yeah, my house hasn't sold, right? But what are some of the other things you might see that indicates a changing market? I'll give you an example. I had an agent tell me, buyers asking a lot more questions. Buyers asking a lot more questions.
Yeah.
A lot more questions. Back in COVID, they weren't asking any questions. No, it's really crazy. Interesting psychology back then. What else is going on right now that you see changes?
Sellers are prepping their houses a little bit more.
Hold on, you mean they actually have to pick up after themselves? Yeah. And actually do something? Yes, absolutely.
Probably more open houses too.
More open houses, right? It's interesting, my email's blowing up more about houses and price changes and things like that. Somehow I'm stuck on that email that shows me that an agent has a house coming up or a house is being reduced in price. What are some of the other things that change? How about some of the things that you're not going to know about so much unless you have an inter-office collaborative kind of, hey, this is what's going on. But I think inter-office is interesting conversations. Hey, this open house, 8 months ago, 10 months ago, 12 months ago, I would have had 100 people. Now I just had one person sniffing around. Traffic.
I think consistency and motivation too of clients.
Yeah, and that would be, how quickly do they react? How quickly do they buy?
How much due diligence they're offering.
Exactly. And those, and what kind of loans? I never saw an FHA.
Right.
I didn't see an
There was no
FHA
FHA
loan
for
in
2
years. And now I'm finally seeing FHA loans. I'm seeing low due diligence, believe it or not, on houses. It's really ridiculous. That tells me, when I'm looking at that contract, right, it tells me that they didn't have a lot of offers if they're accepting a $500 due diligence and FHA loan. So those are some things that you can see that kind of tell me the market's changing a little bit. And the interesting thing is that people say, well, why do prices go up and down so quickly? Why do prices appreciate so quickly, and why do prices can change like that so quickly?
Demand.
Yeah, there's a supply and demand. What about this? Do you realize that, well, not everyone, but you work both sides of the transaction? You're both a listing agent and a buyer's agent. So what you're experiencing on the listing side might give you some insight on what's going on the buy side. If William had a house in the same neighborhood and it's been sitting there, but he has a buyer who's interested in another house in the neighborhood, he has some inside track on what the market's doing. That inside information could be helpful to the buy side on what to expect. On the reverse of that might be the fact that, as a listing agent, if you had 5 offers, right, on a property and you're getting ready to represent a buyer on another house in a competing neighborhood, Are you gonna say, hey, let's offer $20,000 lower? No, you know those buyers are probably moving on to this house, those 4 that didn't make out. So understanding the market, I think, is really important from also, and you're asking, well, what does this have to do with anything, Tim? You know, we don't worry about all this. Well, it does when you're selecting comparable sales. Right? So remember, I had a CMA, an associate in my office. This, just everyone knows. Everyone's seen this. This is not a CMA. Right? These are just addresses plugged into the thing and it prints it out. And to give you an example, and I'll pass this around, a couple of these around, is this particular agent, our subject property was 1,300 square feet. Just leave it at that. That's just one property variable. When we think about comparable sales, you want to pick out what are the main market contributions to your price. What is the moving market drivers to your property? In this case, it would be age built, 1-story, 1,300 square feet. Just leave it there. And if you select comparable sales that aren't similar in any respects, that would be considered like comparing a Tesla electric car to a gasoline car, or a Ford F-150 to a Honda Civic. Completely not comparable. So the best analysis you can do is maybe a Camry to a Honda Accord, right? Truck to a truck, sedan to a sedan, electric to electric. But when you select comparable sales that aren't comparable in any respect, that will result in a poor analysis, what it boils down to. So when you're selecting comparable sales, in this particular case, all the comps were 300 square feet smaller, and 1,300 square foot house, 300 is a pretty big number, yeah, right? If it was an 8,000 square foot house, no big deal. I mean, but with a 1,300 square foot house, houses that are 300 square feet smaller, one house is 40 years newer, you know, it's just, this is not a CMA. And as a matter of fact, one of the comparable sales that really actually supports the price wasn't even included in here, and it's right next door. And I think the close date, don't worry about close date. Someone asked me the other day about in Boylan Heights, you know, just a CMA, and they said, oh, the best comparable sale was 14 months ago. Well, guess what? That's still a good comp. The only variable that we're missing there is time. That's it. So would you rather use a comparable sale that closed yesterday that's not comparable, or a comp that sold 14 months ago that's identical? Do you see? So what I've done is, yes, you've checked the box of recent, but then you have to adjust for all those other differences with the subject, between that and the subject, which is almost impossible to do. Or go back in time, use identical home, and just adjust for time. Do you see where I've gone from 5 variables to 1? Go ahead.
Good question about time. What do you look at? Do you look at inflation? Do you look at the price of increase, like the growth rate in that zip code? Like, what would you do if you could go back 14 months?
It's gonna be a test after this, all right? What's your name?
John.
John, all right, John. My brother's name is John. That's a good name. I'm Tim. Yeah, my parents had simple names for us. Back then, that's what they were, right? Now it's all these jazzy names, right? Chase, whatever. To answer your question, use the time machine. So one of the things I do, right? You could say, okay, well, you know, the news and the media says, oh, 10% appreciation. What I like to do is I like to use what I call the time machine. So when that near identical home to our house sold back then, how were the sales back then? What were the relationship between that house and the other comps, right? And then forward and kind of use that relationship. So you're not going to see this necessarily in an appraisal called the bonus factor, but a bonus might be, it's like, hey, when that house sold back 18 months ago, it sold for 1.1 million. At the same time, 3 months, 6 months before and after that sale, the house is in the neighborhood we're selling for X amount. And then using that relationship to the current comps today that are not necessarily as comparable or like the subject. But the other way to do it is try to find houses that sold back then that also resold today and look at the appreciation change there. And sometimes you can find that that home doesn't necessarily have to be comparable to your subject. What you're trying to do is just see the trend line on appreciation. But make sure you stick in the same price point. So, and you can see that in the computer. What you do is you search the comps and then just hit double click address, and it puts the addresses all in line, and I can see the same addresses and kind of look at the comparison of the prices.
So first, I just got an email from McNamara Appraisals asking me about a closing I had coming up and how closely it's literally just right now. As
No.
you said that, I just got an email from somebody at your firm. So one of the things that I do,
And do you understand, so it's one that you have under contract?
right, we're closing this week, and
Uh-huh.
your appraiser wants to know how close we are to that price
So-
that he's working on.
Just kind of let you know the reason why we do that
Yeah.
is because that right there is going to give us a good understanding of what today's market is. And yes, that went under contract a month ago maybe.
Yeah, and
But
honestly, when I told him, he's like, you don't have to tell me the price, but just give or take. And I just told him the price, but then I told him my seller was in a financial hardship too, and that matters, right? As to what he would take at that given moment to get that close this week versus sitting on it for another couple of months and potentially getting his price.
Well, we try to find out whether or not just whether we should use it, but maybe we shouldn't use it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can, by conversations with the listing agent, find out lenders, real estate, there's a lot of liability in this job. I mean, there is. Whether you all know it or not, you'll find out. There's a lot of liability and there's a lot of influences that come in here. But lenders will do a double check on my appraisal and say, I'm dealing with one, I dealt with one this past month, very complex appraisal, right? And I say lender, it's really not the specific lender, it is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It's people that buy the loans. They'll say, why didn't the appraiser use this, this, and that? Well, it just so happens they were truly not comparable, but they get pulled up in their system because they're in proximity. So just because a house closed half a mile away doesn't make it any more comparable than one that closed 2 miles away. So the real definition, I feel, what is a comparable home or comparable sale is a house that your typical buyer, subject typical buyer, would have considered if it was available at the same time.
So I had another question.
Yeah.
I have a listing right now where it's interesting. It's a 1-bedroom, 1-bath ranch townhouse, just like duplex, right? Not like in a big condo complex. And the most recent sales are 2 years ago. Okay. There's other sales in the neighborhood that have 2-story or have 2 bedrooms, right? And so struggling a little bit with that. So I sort of went back and said, well, the other one's closed at 200 and 210 2 years ago. We have, I feel like, appreciation still. So I priced it at 219. There's nothing else for sale in Raleigh, right? It's in a condo, but of course the agent who's interested, she's asking, oh, can I see your comps? I'm like, well, yeah. You know, I can show you what happened here. I can show you what's available that's not really comparable, like that condo over here or that single family over here. That's not really super comparable. And then I can show you townhouses, similar square footage in Wake County, but those are older. I don't know, it's hard. So anyway, and she's trying to protect her buyer, which I get, and I'm trying to get the most money I can for my seller. And
I'm going to give you an example of that. I think
you can just run it if you want.
No, if I had my laptop, I would. So this is all to kind of help you just kind of understand what market you're in. I think that's important. I think a lot of agents would love to know, hey, you know, how much are people putting down for due diligence now? You know, just make sure you look at, you know, the listed sales price ratio, the days on market, the pending sales, just to kind of get an understanding of what the expectations are on that. You know, when we're talking about closed sales, and I'll just tie this up real quickly, and I'm going to move to that example there, is that if I'm doing, if this is our market now, And it was the case because the spring market, I think, is appreciating a little bit. Let's just say there's upward pressure. We're not making any time adjustments now. But if I were to pick comps that were really recent, maybe they were in November or December, they technically could be reflecting here. But it might be better to pull comps that were the same seasonal spring market here.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Do it all
Yeah.
the time.
When you have a fluctuating market like this, which it is, this market's having trouble finding its feet. And you can put it down to interest rates if you want. You know, global economic uncertainty, inflation readings, sticky inflation, are they going to lower the interest rates? My prediction, and you can erase this recording if it doesn't come true, but is that I would be preaching to everyone, if you're ready to buy a house, buy it now, right? Because once these interest rates come down, and they will, because we have an election coming up, and normally they will, well, I don't want to get too political. Is that once those interest rates come down, what do you think we'll have? Higher demand?
And
Yep.
higher prices, a surge.
Yes. Do you think any of the supply is going to change at all?
Not really.
No, it's not. Unfortunately, and interest rates aren't going to go down to 3.5%. If they do, then we all have bigger issues to deal with, like a war, big war, or another COVID or something. So we don't want interest rates at 3.5%. Believe it or not, people. But if they go down to 5.5% to 6%, we are going to have a significant surge. And so I personally, and I don't have the numbers on this, and I'm not buying a house, but if I were buying a house, I prefer to buy it at 6.5%, 7% today at 300, and then refinance 2 years ago, than wait 6 months and have to pay $50,000 more, but get a great interest rate. But my interest rate's great. Do you see?
Or they need to save more money.
Yeah. Or I'm going to have to give up my firstborn, my DNA. I'm going to have to get the house without inspections. So keep in mind, buying a house today at a little bit elevated interest rate is going to be much better for you as a buyer, and then just refinance down the road. So moving on. That's my sales pitch. If you want to, and I think unless we have some more supply, the lower interest rates are going to. Interest rates don't have to go much lower for our market to continue to do what it's doing, just to be honest with you. Even 0.25% will probably be very helpful to, and there are buyers out there. I have multiple offers on houses all the time. So you have
It's a one floor townhouse, but it's only connected to, it's an end unit, so it's only connected to one other property.
Yep. So townhomes are interesting in the fact that in a row, there's usually only 2 end units, right? But what happens, because there's fewer end units, you have fewer of those sales at a given time. I call it match pair. So let's pretend in this particular project, you had some sales, but the sales were inside sales. These are an end unit, and the end units are 1 story with first floor master bedroom, for instance, and let's say it's 1,350 square feet, right? And these are going to be a little bit larger interior floor plans, right? Go back in time, and you did this, right?
Yeah, mine's actually just got the 2 units though, it's not.
You have a duplex duet.
Yeah.
Yep. You can go back in time.
Yep.
So every sale in the neighborhood is an end unit?
No, the problem is it's Hedingham. So Hedingham is detached homes, and it's the 2-story townhomes, and then these are the single-story townhomes. And there's probably only 20 of them in the whole neighborhood.
Well, you know why they built that. Fred Smith built that back then like that. It's
They were
because-
rentals, I think.
Yeah, well, the market changed too.
Yeah,
They
right.
said, well, if I can't sell a house for 240 back then, why can't I sell 2 townhomes at 120? I mean, lower the quality. It's just that it was a no-brainer. But now everyone in the front that was promised homes in 300s.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But I'm digressing here.
Yeah, so the thing is that there's only like 20 of these like this, okay? And the last couple sold in 2022. And they're all like 750 square feet with a 2-car parking pad out front, and a you know, they're 2003, so they're not old. They're nice compared to a lot of other.
Are you talking
silver
about the ones that are more the empty nester ones?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, okay. That doesn't really work with this example.
Sorry. So basically, you just pick a number, right?
No,
Fingers
No, no,
crossed,
no.
see what the market
Probably
says.
like you did, you increased it by 10%, right?
Yeah, I
So
mean-
then you could say, are things smaller, bigger around it, or
Yeah, what
whatever,
you-
kind of trended about 10%.
Go back to when,
Yeah.
for instance, you can use a dissimilar, I think I mentioned this to John, a non-comparable home. So back then when these sold, right? The last one sold in, you said 2020?
Yeah,
Two.
22.
22, sorry.
2 years.
So, and it, those are, what are they, 325?
No, one sold for 200
200.
and one sold for 210. They're just one bedroom. 200 and 210.
Time machine, find out some other houses that have closed then.
Yeah,
Could be
you're
even
right.
townhomes,
Mhm.
right? And then see what those townhomes,
Even the 2-story ones.
Yeah.
even a two-story, they're not comparable specifically to the subject. You're trying to figure out if you are,
Appreciation rate.
But then I can
yeah, if there's
pad
any
it, right?
appreciation or if there's any change in value.
But then I can pad it too, because I don't still feel like the appreciation of the 2-story, 1.5 bath is the same as this entry level, especially when there's nothing like it in
Yeah.
Raleigh. Of course, you know, ultimately it's going to be who brings me an offer, right? And what do I get?
It's all the acid test. You have it listed, let's see what happens. You
Okay.
want, there is we don't use padding in appraisal terms, but there is a defensibility.
Mhm.
So let's just pretend, let's just say you were able to find a couple townhomes, or even, they don't even have to be identical addresses, they could be a townhome that sold for $275 and then the same type of unit sold a year later or 2 years
that's
later
good.
for $290 and the
Right.
appreciation was this.
Yeah.
I would think that's defensible, right?
I think so too. Mhm.
Defensible.
Yeah, I like it.
So and it's not that you're using these specifically as comps. What you're doing is what are we missing with this word problem? And it's time. That's
Right.
all. Because we don't have anything that's comparable that have closed. So time is the missing variable here. You're trying to connect the dots between, we know what it sold for back then. Now we need to know what's the experience going to be today. And the only way to do that is use other sales in the neighborhood to come up with an appreciation. And you're right, you should be sensitive to, well, detached homes may appreciate at a different rate than these empty nesters that everyone's looking for. And they may be in higher demand because there hadn't been as many exposed to the market. So,
I'm going to do that because that is not something I did not go back and really look at. I looked at 100 different ways, but I did not go back and look at, okay, something else, you know, another townhome in Headingham, not just one, but like several.
Yeah, just look at
How
it.
are those appreciating?
you might find the same property that's resold. You know, so you're going to get a good
Right.
understanding of, you know what, it is 10%. And yeah, you pat it a little bit on there just to kind of see, you know, what the market would say. But at least there's a roadmap to how you got to the number.
Yeah.
And where we go wrong from an appraisal standpoint is when we ask the listing agent, what did you use? And we hear crickets.
Right. I used what my seller said.
Seller's opinion, Zillow.
I'm sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
While we're on the time subject, you know, as we're seeing so much new construction pop up, and at least I'm starting to see that first home in the community go back up for resale, or maybe the first two pop up on the resale market in these new communities. Can we still use that time factor with like the surrounding area or the triangle, you know, dive into the appreciation of a larger scale?
So we're talking about the first resale in a new construction neighborhood. You know, we have an interesting appraisal we're doing this week on a property that is the new resale that sold 12 months ago. The value of that property is going to be somewhat dictated by what's available from a substitution, meaning what's active under contract and what the builder is selling their products for, what their house is for. So we're going to have to first use that new construction active, pending, and closed sales because that's what the appraiser will probably use. And other market participants. When I talk about market participants, I'm talking about buyers agents and appraisers and lenders. So first look at what's available in the neighborhood to use, and then ask yourself, has the market really changed in this neighborhood? And what kind of incentives is the new construction offering? I know sometimes when we see market depreciation, it really starts on the new construction side, and you might say, well, why is that? Because you have more transactions on the new side than you do in a specific resale neighborhood. That you might just have maybe 2 or 3 homes that sell in a given year in an XYZ neighborhood. But in a new construction neighborhood, you have more activity, and it's so that it's going to be, prices are going to be more sensitive. And meaning, I bought a house in XYZ neighborhood, I've lived in it for 13 months, but the builder's still building houses. So any buyer is going to look at any standing inventory first, and then the builder's incentives to move those houses can be very detrimental to a resale owner, because a builder is working off a profit sheet, and they have a little bit more bandwidth when it comes to offering down payment assistance, closing costs that your seller may not be able to offer, and you're going to run into that. When builders ramp up their inventory through spec homes, that can be the kiss of death for the resale seller, unless the builder's gone up in their prices or is 4 months out from completing a home, which we did see back in COVID. That's why we saw we saw some resales. You can use this analogy with cars almost. You saw a resale car almost selling for the same price as a new car because people had to wait. Same thing with new construction, inventories, and things like that. It's really interesting. I tell agents, first look at the comparable sales that you think your peers would consider if they're presenting an offer. Look at the comps that you think an appraiser would use. And ask yourself, you know what, how can they ignore this comp? And then you need to find out, is it a good comp? So calling the listing agent and the buying agent, see if there's any extra motivations there. You know, did that resale sell $20,000 below list price? And then why? Maybe there was some extra motivations behind it that you, as a listing agent, can tell the appraiser when he comes out, I know you're going to see this comp. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't you? It just closed 2 doors down from our house. But know that its listed sales price ratio, it sold for a lot less than it should have sold in a given market, and it's because it was overly motivated seller. You're planting the seed, in a way. Now they may still put it in the report, but you, as you reconcile your pricing, might decide a little bit less weight on that sale. Keep in mind, before I went out to the house, this was my cat daddy comp, right? I mean, how can you ignore a identical home? But hey, I'm hearing it's probably a little bit more motivated. You know, it sold on the first day to the first buyer for $20,000 less. That seems a little over motivated, right? And then at least I can relay that to the lender, and you would relay that to the listing agent or the appraiser. Go ahead.
I have a 2-part question. I have a unique listing coming up this week that is actually a personal property that we owned that was burned down last year, and we had to rebuild it. And so it's in a subdivision of mostly late 90s, early 2000 homes, but now I have this beautiful new construction home there. And I'm curious how you would go about, it's in Apex, like how you would go about addressing comps for that.
Yeah, I try to use a blend of comps. Okay. Let me finish this real quick. I'll tie this up in 1 minute. When you're talking about using the time machine on this particular one, had an end unit that was a 1,300 square foot home, but last year there wasn't any, right? What you do is you go back in time, you find the last couple end unit, first floor, master bedrooms, and find out that they sold for $220, and $225. And in the same time period, compare it to the interior ones, and maybe these sold for $180 and $190. That price difference back then of $25,000 to $30,000 reflects the combined differences of end unit, square footage, first floor, master bedroom. You can use this differential in price to the current sales that you have. So now, 2 years later, these are selling for maybe $300. Then it would make sense that you could either apply the price appreciation difference or the percentage difference to this new price could give you a good understanding of where you should be. Because if that price difference was the case back then, why wouldn't it be now? Do you see how that's much more defensible than the pull it out of the air kind of scenario?
So you would do that versus trying to find comps outside of the subdivision that are similar or like kind?
It could be both.
Okay.
Kind of like I'm getting ready to, with your
Okay.
example, for instance. I like the blend.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if I use 3 comps, 3 interior townhome sales and all adjusted $40,000 across the board, the lender would freak.
Mm-hmm.
Because the lender doesn't want to see plus, plus, plus. They don't want to see plus 40, plus 40, plus 40. They want to see bracketing. That's a key term that you guys should carry around with you, bracketing. They want to see in the analysis a home that sold for more than yours, less than yours. They don't want to see straight line adjustments across the board that says, it could be plus square footage, it could be plus site, it could be plus quality, condition, or effective age. They do not like to see those adjustments. And for good reason, because keep in mind, the lender, I apologize, I digress sometimes, but it's really the lender's money. Right? A borrower it's a privilege that they can buy a house and borrow $400,000, right? So it's the lender who's coming up with the money. There's a risk there with lending this type of money, so they need to make sure that their collateral is accurate from an assessment standpoint, from a value standpoint. Now, they collectively look at everything, they look at your credit score, how much money you have in the bank and all that, but they also look at the appraisal because they want to make sure if they had to sell the house that they could sell it for what you bought it for. A lot of people think it's a right to be able to get a mortgage. It's not. It's a privilege. And appraisers are just trying to do their job to create a defensible report. My report's not defensible if I have plus 100, plus 100, plus 100, because the lender's going to say, well, how do I know it's not plus 200 or plus 0? And that changing those adjustments could affect the value. So bracketing is very important in any analysis. I call it bookending. If this is your subject, you want to find something that's a little bit more expensive and a little bit less expensive. And that's at its simplest terms or explanation. And I use the analogy of a car, but and I apologize if these analogies aren't wrong, but it kind of gets people to understand them. If I was selling a Honda Accord at 100,000 miles, right, I wouldn't use a Tesla, right? But I use a Camry with 100. I might use a Honda Accord with 120,000 miles, year older, or something newer. Do you see how you kind of bracket the subject? Bracketing the subject is so key with the property. You have a new house in an established neighborhood. Now, if I use a house inside a neighborhood, I am now not reflecting what? Age. Age has 2 components in a way. We call it long-lived and short-lived. We call it effective age, right? Long-term, the sticks and stones that build up your house, right? The membranes in your house, the timbers and the roof and the exterior walls are all brand new. And if you're in a 40-year-old neighborhood?
No, like 25-ish.
Yeah,
24, 25.
So 25, right? But so the roof trusses and the studs and the plywood on the outside and the siding, that's all 25 years old. And then you have short-lived or short to medium, which is carpeting, components, the cabinets, all that. So you have 2 differences here on this, right? How big is your lot size?
I think it's like 0.14.
Well, what do you have in a 25-year-old neighborhood? Right? A lot of trees, diversity in homes, prices, and things like that.
It was a tract subdivision, so.
Okay.
So maybe not.
So not, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was built by, I think, Torrey Homes at the time. So there was X amount of floor plans that you could choose.
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't know how diverse it is, right? We'll just call it like 10 different floor plans.
So the blend would be okay, let's find another comparable production built home that's brand new to see how big's the house?
1825 square
Okay.
feet.
Now, you may not find a comparable home now because new construction is going to be much larger.
Yeah.
Why?
Prices
Because
of land.
yeah. So So I could go to a competing new construction neighborhood. Unfortunately, they're going to be 25 to 3,500 square foot house and $1 million now. The
Yeah.
production built homes are crazy. But let's just say they did exist.
Okay.
I would use a blend of new construction and existing homes.
Okay.
And the reason why is, especially if I could find an existing home that was completely remodeled on the inside, that would be the best comparison. I'm trying to find the best comparisons to your subject property to compare your property. And the price point is important. For instance, if I go to that new construction neighborhood, they have homes from 500 to 700. Your neighborhood, just making stuff up, maybe 300 to 400. So even though I found something brand new, right, that reflects that age and condition, the site value might be different. Because people would prefer to have all conforming neighborhoods about the same age. Neighborhood might have better
And I guess that's
amenities.
what we're trying to figure out is what is that delta difference or what is that percentage difference, right? That someone's willing to pay for a premium for new construction.
It's one of the toughest, it is.
It is.
Because you're asking what's a new home worth. You know, now if you were inside the Beltline, we could find other new homes. But they just haven't done tear downs yet in your neighborhood. Go ahead.
But wouldn't the market adjust for that? If you went on the more conservative route, wouldn't the market adjust and go over list price significantly?
Yeah, there's a listing price strategy, and I think we all back in the COVID were, you know, better list low and then let it naturally go as high as possible, and that way you could take the best offer possible, and that best offer may not be price, but due diligence. Yeah, pricing it reasonable is the key.
Yeah.
Your house is going to sell more than another 25-year-old home that hasn't been touched. We know that.
Yeah.
So we know the bottom baseline, right? And then how much more would a house sell for that's brand new? You know, if you could find another home that is completely remodeled and sold for a premium in that neighborhood, that would be a great comparison, because then you would say, okay, this other house sold at the top end of its neighborhood because it was unique, just like mine is, because of this, this, and that. It was completely remodeled on the inside. And the long-lived is less discernible from a buyer's perspective because they figured the house is not going to collapse on itself anyway.
Yeah.
So, but it's more or less the cosmetic and the cabinets and more or less the condition on the inside.
So
And it could be quality too, because you didn't, when you built new, you didn't put Formica countertops in it.
No, at that
No.
time, that was like the upgrade was the
And you
nice
didn't put
Formica
popcorn
countertops.
popcorn ceilings in. So not only do you have a newer home, but you also have a more modern home that has more of today's features you would expect in a new construction home. Smooth ceilings, 9-foot ceilings maybe. You know, see, there's multiple variables there. But what's the address? Because if I get that appraisal, I'm going to turn it down.
Do I want to
I'm
shoot
just
you?
kidding, I'm just kidding,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
No, I guess my question would be like, how far would you go, right? If it's Apex 27539, how far would you go? Would you just try to stay within that zip code then?
I don't search based on zip codes. I ask myself, would a typical buyer consider this house?
Yeah.
So when you ask yourself, hey, I'm going to use if this closed sale was available when your house was on the market, would the same typical buyer, that had to be identical,
Yeah.
but a typical buyer would have considered it, and then when I'm using the comparable sales, am I using comparable sales that reflect the market drivers of my property? Give me an example, and this is an exaggeration, but if you're doing if you were doing an appraisal inside the Beltline or selling a house inside the Beltline, would you use a home in North Wake County?
No.
What have you given up?
Location.
Yeah, that's a huge market driver,
Mhm.
right? So if the comps you're selecting doesn't check the box on most of your market drivers, then it's probably not comparable. And the fewer boxes you've checked, the less comparable it is. So decide what your market drivers are. In your case, it would be definitely new.
Yeah.
New and new condition in an established neighborhood, which has some appeal to it. And then what's your land value? What would it cost to replace the house? I mean, so your house may sell for a much higher premium than some of the other houses in there. But again, it's going to depend on the total package, of course.
Can I add to this scenario? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Or just ask a question, like, I guess when would you recommend a pre-listing appraisal? And second part to that is from an appraisal
I appreciate that question because it comes up quite often, and I am less inclined to say a listing appraisal is good, or I only like to do appraisals if it's really going to help the whole situation out. Sometimes I found that appraisals, pre-listing appraisals, a number of things could happen. A lot of times pre-listing appraisals are being suggested because the listing agent and the seller are not on the same page. Otherwise, why would you even get an appraisal, right? And that's the case. Normally, the seller is the one who is at a much higher price. You have to make sure that the seller is willing to look at my analysis. I find that during the daytime, the seller will say they will consider the appraisal, but once they get the appraisal, they just turn and say hogwash. Sellers who have it in their mind that their house is worth a number, they're not going to believe. Sometimes they don't believe in an appraiser. Well, they don't.
No, it's true.
It is what it is.
It's like they don't believe in
Well,
appraisal.
they're going to come up with, well, that's your guy. So sometimes maybe it's best for the seller to come up with the name and number of the appraiser instead of the listing agent. I find sometimes that if I come up with a number, and if this has happened, trust me, this has happened in the past, I'll come up with a number, and keep in mind I'm doing an appraisal on a certain day, the value is for that day, but they don't list it for 30, 60 more days. A lot can change in the marketplace. There may be better comparable sales available at that time of listing that could influence that pricing. I had a time when I did an appraisal for $850. Very difficult appraisal. Again, normally these pre-listing appraisals aren't the easy ones. You know, they're normally the hard ones. But the seller got an offer for $840, not $850, my appraisal, and he didn't accept it because he had in writing $850. And it just, that's an opinion of value.
It's not a science.
And if it turns out that, you know, they didn't accept that offer, they moved on, and they ultimately sold for $800 because it just got sat on the market, and over time it got dropped in price. As a matter of fact, I think it actually changed listing agents.
Of course.
I did an appraisal last year on a very complex property, a 2-bedroom house. They had it listed for $3.9 million. I come in a lot of times to kind of help the seller understand that their house would never sell for this number. But of course, the listing agent continued to list the property for that price. Didn't sell for that price. It ultimately was relisted with another agent because now the seller's willing to listen, and it sold for about what the appraisal was, 2.5. So I want to do appraisals where it's going to help. A lot of times I think I can help you with a comp selection. Hey, these are the comps I probably would be considering in my analysis. That's where we first start, I think, with an agent. I start with an agent like, hey, these are the comps I would be looking at, you know, and this is kind of the range I would be in with these comps. How does that help? And then we go on with a more conversation about, you know, whether or not it would help a homeowner or not. I don't know if I answered your question. I just kind of rambled on. Sorry about that.
That was great, thank you.
All right, cool. Yes.
The second part, which is totally unrelated from that particular house, as a listing agent, what is most helpful to you as an appraiser?
So I send out an email to every listing agent, well, 99% of them. So my email to the listing agent is before I inspect the property, and I ask them for a list of all the updates and improvements to the prop. It's a great way to copy and paste and put in my report. I know that some are listed in the MLS, but I like that. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Second is I'll ask how many offers you might have had on the property. I like to put that verbiage in my report because I think it sounds better to the lender. Hey, there were 7 offers on the property, all above list price. And then I'll ask the listing agent about comparable sales they used in their analysis. I love asking that question because there may be a comparable sale that you looked at that I didn't pick up or see. The MLS merge has really screwed things up a little bit. And so I want to make sure that I don't miss any comparable sales. And the reason why I do all this prior to listing or my inspection is because I've known that that if I ask like a couple days later, I mean, the agent's going to go, well, there's not a problem with the value. So, or at least that's what you should be thinking.
And I would say some appraisers don't have the knowledge of every single neighborhood, and sometimes the agent is a better.
That's the best time, and I don't know, and I haven't had any appraisers calling me saying, why are you telling these agents this? But I think I want to know as much information before I go to the assignment as possible. And the reason why is because if my opinion of value is less than the contract price, I'm going to hear from you at some point in time.
Yeah.
And I'd rather hear all this before I finish my appraisal. Because it might be, hey, I know you might not have thought of this neighborhood as being competing, but it is. Because I've had shown houses in both these neighborhoods.
Right, and you're really good, but not every appraiser has been doing it for 25 years. So especially with some of the
Well, I've made plenty of mistakes over that time.
the younger people, sometimes you get the Greensboro appraiser, and he's coming out here, and he doesn't know that these two neighborhoods are actually very similar. Even if they're a mile apart.
Some buyer's agents and appraisers, to check the box, will use the homes that are closest to the subject because no lender is going to argue with a home, a comp that comes up as 0.10 miles away or just closed last week. But again, it may not check the boxes of comparable in quality, comparable in condition, age, and whether or not it's a reliable market indicator today. I try to use pending sales in my report because that's the best way to kind of bridge the gap between something that closed 6 months ago and then today. Understanding the subject through the listing agent helps too, because the listing agent might say, hey, you may not see this, but this house sold 2 doors down, I saw it myself, it has no backyard, it really struggled as far as the listing goes. Could be anything like Now, I may not rely solely on what you told me. I might call the agent to verify it, but it may make an appraisal is an opinion of values and reconciliation. We're looking at the data and going, okay, I'm going to lean a little bit more on this end of the range of value, on the higher end, because of this, and other reason why, and because of this pending sale. As a listing agent, this is the best time for you to kind of put your best foot forward. When you're presenting the information to the seller, know that information, and even if your home has been listed for a month or 2, you should be still searching for comparable sales because you want to update your listing too. Do I need to make a price adjustment? Has another closed sale come up? Because as a buyer's agent, I might say to you, to the listing agent, hey, did you see this one just closed last week? And you want to be able to defend your pricing based on that sale. So always keeping up to date with activity since you put the house on the market is important. If you get a showing time appointment, it's okay to reach out to the appraiser and just say, hey, I do this with all my listings. Once I get the appointment time, I send this information to the appraiser. Here's a complete list of all the updates and improvements to the property. This is what makes our property a little bit more unique and more desirable than some other houses I've closed. I consider this as a comp. This is one I used. This one, I know it falls out that 2.1 miles. 2.1 miles is not used. Distance of comparable sale doesn't matter. It's all about whether or not it's the same buyer would consider it.
Tim, do you
Yeah.
put any value difference on HOA fees or rental restrictions into?
I can't really do that. I think the number of rentals, would you say more rentals would mean that the values are a little bit lower or higher?
Well,
Depends.
it depends. I think, like, if you have a high rental area that's further out, it might decrease the value, while you have a high rental area that's kind of close to
Yeah.
everything.
Type of renter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to say this because it could be considered, but sometimes tenants care a little bit less about the property maybe. I don't know. So if you have a lot of tenants in a neighborhood, that could ultimately lower the property values maybe. But if you're using comps inside the neighborhood, then that common denominator is checked. Because that same influence would be present at the same time that house sold. So yeah, you just, when you go outside the subject neighborhood, you've already given up a pretty important market variable. Neighborhood amenities, price point of the subdivision, overall location, walkability to a school that's right there. So staying inside the neighborhood is your first priority, and then you go outside. If you go outside the neighborhood, ask yourself this question: is this neighborhood superior, equal to, or inferior? That's all you need to ask yourself. You know, by how much? I mean, no one can say, oh, $10,000, $20,000. But at least ask yourself, because what you want to do is in your CMA, make sure you didn't go to 3 neighborhoods outside that were all positive, meaning superior to yours, because that would skew what your house could probably sell for. You could do a historical match pair and kind of find out. What I always do and suggest is the subject's prior sale is a really good indicator. So if it sold 3 years ago for $300,000 at 3,000 square feet, and you want to go to this other neighborhood, right? Because you found one that's really comparable, go back in time and find out how that neighborhood did when your last house sold. That back history comparison, that match pair, can kind of give you some indication. I know neighborhoods change over time, but a seller can sometimes say, well, can you use that one? Can you use that one? And they know all along, the seller knows all along it's a better neighborhood. And the best way to show it on paper is what they paid for it 2 years ago compared to the same size home back then. Well, you chose this house in this neighborhood because it was priced $100,000 lower. The market still sees the same difference today. So you've quickly kind of connected the dots on why that house outside may be located in a superior neighborhood. Does that all kind of, do you see how that connecting the dots there? Using historical sales. So I'm at 12:03 now. I don't want to take everyone's time. The fourth leg of this table was about just making adjustments. So I'll run through this real quickly. Making adjustments, just make sure that you kind of make sure it's common sense. Common sense adjustments. Does it make sense for the price point? And one of the things that comes up quite often is, what does the value of a new kitchen have? What does the value of a new master bathroom have compared to the other sales in the neighborhood? Sometimes I'm with a homeowner might say, I'm thinking about putting in a $75,000 kitchen into my house. And so first of all, you have to ask, well, how old's your house? If someone said, I have a brand new house and I'm gonna put a new kitchen in, how much contribution would that have? 0. Good. If I had a house that was 100 years old, and I said I'm gonna put a new kitchen in, how much contribution do you think that would have?
A lot.
Probably the cost. Because that kitchen on that older home is at the end of its economic life. How long do you think kitchens could last? I'm gonna say 30 years. I've seen some 40-year-old kids. Now granted, I'm not saying that it's what we want, but it's functioning as a kitchen. Cabinets open, it's got countertops, right? So if you have a 30-year-old home and it has an original kitchen and they want to put in a $65,000 kitchen, right, then maybe the kitchen adjustment should be close to that number. But what if you have a 15-year-old home and you want to put a $65,000 kitchen in? They're replacing a kitchen that has some life left, some market contribution. So when you're comparing to other 15-year-old homes, right? So a comp sold for $400,000 and had a 15-year-old kitchen. Everything is identical except the kitchen. Right? Maybe this adjustment should be more like $20,000 to $30,000. Do you see why we don't adjust the full amount? Because this house sold with a kitchen that had some 15 years left life. So you're really comparing the difference in market contribution or market depreciation between a 15-year-old kitchen and a new kitchen. Wouldn't be the total amount. Now, let's say this house sold at $400,000 and it did not have a kitchen. The adjustment would be more. Because the house sold for $400,000 without a kitchen, the buyer had to put a kitchen in. So just remember that contributions for components being changed has a lot to do with how long they last and what was the comp what improvements the comp had.
Just, I heard from some appraisers that they don't adjust for like wood floors in certain areas, and as a realtor, we know like, hey, that's going to be a driving factor if somebody says I have wood steps and wood upstairs in common areas versus carpet going all the way up. So, how do you approach that?
Yeah, that's and I don't repeat this, but in an appraisal, less is best. In a value, because you start making some of these smaller adjustments, the lender's going to say, well, how did you come up with this? That's where the reconciliation process comes in, and the bracketing. So it is hard to adjust for, second floor has hardwood floors versus another house that has carpeting. It is hard to adjust for those smaller differences in these houses, because keep in mind, the market may not have known of those differences too. Because isn't the market using the closed MLS sales just as us? And if they didn't have a lot of photographs, in their mind, they're thinking it had probably the same stuff you have. So it's not gonna move the needle as much. I think if I had a house that I'm listing in a production built neighborhood and had more upgrades, that's something that could be considered to move the house a little bit quicker, maybe get more multiple offers. And then what I wanna do is I wanna find another home in the neighborhood that's sold at or above that price. The toughest CMA or toughest appraisal is when you have one of the better houses in the neighborhood and you want to list it for 400, but all the closed sales in the neighborhood are 375 and 350. It's hard to bridge that gap, make up that difference. So.
Tim, can I ask you, how are you seeing basement and third floor values now since COVID and the crazy
Yeah, I mean,
times?
if you're,
Are you still adjusting that?
I'm adjusting, well, I mean, the biggest difference I've seen is the pool adjustments.
Yeah.
I remember, embarrassingly enough, I used to not make pool adjustments back in the day. But now it's, keep in mind, it all comes down to is the price point of the house, the pool itself, and those kind of things. But you're seeing these pool contribution to be pretty significant. And you can see, you have people coming in from out of the area. They'd rather plug and play. They don't want to wait 2 years. They don't want to spend 200 grand. They don't want to have to deal with it. They want their kids playing in that pool immediately on this track out system we have. And then you have the reason why our market really changed appreciation wise. There's a lot of reasons why, but you had also a lot of influx of people moving from $200 million house. 200? Did I say 200 million?
Yeah.
2 million.
I was like, sweet.
2 million down to this area going, oh my gosh, I'll take 2 of these houses. So you had people with a little extra money that could certainly just outbid other people. The power of the dollar they had was so much stronger down here in North Carolina than the areas they moved from, that's for sure. So we saw those price appreciation jumps. Not to mention, put a needle in my eye, but if you think about it, you move a family of 3 kids and 2 dogs, you're not gonna wanna get stuck in some apartment, with this for 6 months while you're searching. I'd spend 100 grand more just not to deal with that. And everyone's happy. Mama happy, everyone happy, right? So, you had that going on that really moved the market price-wise. When you're comparing a house that has a finished basement or a finished third floor, try to find a like comparable sale that reflects that reaction on that extra square footage. And then ask yourself, is the square footage that I have in this specific subject property, does the extra square footage on the third floor or in the basement make it just much larger than every other house in the neighborhood, or does it more of a complement? If it's more of a complement, meaning it's just different floors and it's more of the median or average for the neighborhood, that's gonna have a better contribution, whether it's downstairs or in the third floor, than if you already had 5,000 square feet and then you add another 2,500 in the basement. You can see how that could be a little over the top square footage, and the market's not gonna probably pay as much for that extra square footage than they would, because it's just, the house is already large enough in the respective neighborhood that it's in. So, does anyone have any questions? Well, that was easy. All right, bye.
Thank you.
No, I'm just kidding. Any questions?
COVID world, kinda like you're saying, less adjustments is better. I mean, it used to be, oh, you've got a sprinkler system, oh, I mean, back in the day, you have wallpaper that actually gave credit for. You know, there was this laundry list of tell me all your upgrades, and the appraiser would feverishly write them down. And then trying to explain to sellers today, especially ones that maybe bought 3-4 years ago new construction, and they paid this laundry list of upgrades, and then the other guy didn't, and except for aesthetically, whether someone likes your white kitchen and your white backsplash or your brown cabinets or not, you know, there may be some aesthetic value that comes out that what a buyer will pay.
Mhm.
But in general, they're just not getting all those little adders that they used to get, and it's very hard for them to conceptualize.
Fence, fireplace, type of screen porch or slab or deck, and then
Garage,
footage,
garage,
garage one, garage
bathrooms,
two.
multiple bathrooms. We had one a week or so ago. Very, very nice house, but they were asking like 1.1, and it was only a 2 in North Raleigh, 2.5 bath. And we got a chunk off of it because they were the third time they got a low offer, and it wasn't low. It was because a little $20,000 or $10,000 adjustment
Doesn't
for a
make
bath in a $1 million plus price was not
it. Don't even,
wasn't gonna
don't even
happen.
touch it.
Wasn't gonna happen. And we were to the point of I was discouraging. I like to get in the way of deals sometimes. Discouraging the buyer from buying it. They're like, well, our kid's almost to college. We've only lived with 1.5 baths in Chicago. 2's fine. But in my world, I'm like, But if you call me a few years to sell that, you see these people
Yeah,
are
that's
struggling. We need to find a spot that we can throw one on if we have to.
You know, you bring up a great point, Sharon, and in fact, when you're a buyer's agent, count on being the selling agent, or at least hope you are the selling agent.
Mm-hmm. When it comes back to you.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things that in an undersupplied market that may not have a lot of adverse effects on marketability, but a floor plan that I call incurable. I think you have to define what's affecting the price. Is it a curable or incurable? A bathroom situation, what I would call incurable, right? You can't really fix it easily. But carpeting, pretty fixable, right? You know, my house is a little less upgraded, could use some more flooring, right? You can change that, that's curable. So just remember that in an undersupplied market, the buyers are purchasing properties right now in an undersupplied market, they're not as sensitive to a little slope in the driveway, power lines, road exposures, but understand in an oversupplied market, it could affect the value. Because when we have a substitution available, buyers will go on to the next house that's available that meets their needs, less the road exposure, less the ski slope driveway, less the power lines, less these. So just remember that, you know, right now, I might not adjust for certain things that in a oversupplied market might have an effect on price, but in an oversupplied market it will. And hopefully we'll never be back to that point in time where we have an oversupplied market and just the littlest thing affects the value. And you could make a long list of things that can affect the value. I mean, just, it's crazy. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure you use the best comps that represent your property's value. So any other questions? Cool. Well, you're so welcome. You all have a great day.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank
saying
you.
that.
You're welcome.
Appraising is hard.
Well, you know, we talked about less is best. You know, our reports have changed.
Right.
And that my report is sent through an automated valuation model, and they compare my adjustments to other appraisers. They pull up their own comps. The lender pulls up their own comps. They ask why I didn't use this. They say that my adjustments aren't consistent with the last time this house was adjusted for. So I try to make as little as possible, and I allow the reconciliation process to really speak for what I think the house is worth.
I talk to clients a lot about what. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
First of all, very nice to
of a building, or are you on a roller coaster?
It doesn't look like that.
I choose a fake brand because they don't wear really high heels and you can see cars.
Oh, okay, it's one of those fake. Okay. What's up?
Just a quick question and nothing terribly specific. But before COVID, I have seen adjustments very, very different for finished attics and finished basements than you see them today as total square footage. I would love to have your opinion of elaborating what you see and how you see it as far as values. Nothing specific, just in a general idea of the differences, because I've seen a difference that, 5, 8 years ago, you finished up the attic, that is 1,000 square foot, you give like a $50,000 valuation. Today, it's literally the same as heat the square footage. How do you see this one? And values?
Yeah.
Why is it changing?
Every situation is different, as you know, Thomas. The market contributions for differences in square footage used to be, I know some appraisers used to do $25, $50 a square foot. Now I'm seeing it much higher per square foot. I try to tell agents to do this thing. Probably about 1/3 the total price of the home. So if the home is at $300, $100 a square foot, right? And you might say, well, how do you come up with 1/3? Well, 1/3 is the land, and we're adjusting for square footage, not the land. 1/3 is for all the other contributions to the property that aren't part of the square footage, which are kitchens, bathrooms, landscaping, garages, and so the other third might be a movement there. Key is the bracket to square footage, so you have positive adjustments and negative adjustments for square footage. And I try to compare like contribution or distribution of the square footage. So if I have a finished third floor, I try to compare it to another house with a finished third floor. Typically, third floors will have a little bit lower value than if it was on the first and second floor because you have one additional staircase to get to it. A lot of times you have knee walls, angled walls, fewer windows, things like that. And that's why you might see third floor having a little bit lower value. Basements, cat daddy, depends on, again, how big's the house to begin with. Is it more of a contribution or an add? Is it more of a complement to the square footage? Or is it just another 2,000 square feet that I struggle even finding room names for? How many flex rooms can you have? Flex 1, flex 2, flex 3. So it depends on the square footage of the house and how it relates to the total neighborhood and that market contribution. But really just like comparable sales. But yeah, we're seeing higher adjustments for sure.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Again, it was just a theoretical question to
Yeah.
see the trend.
We're seeing a lot of people coming from the north, and they are used to having basements. That's for sure. You'll find that contribution being a lot stronger than it used to be.
I found a lot of realtors just take the third floors especially and just lump it all in as square footage. So then I have a hard time if they haven't done something as a post of the third floor total square footage, like, oh, it's 4,400 square feet, but 1,200 of it's in an attic, or is it 950 in an attic? Like I
I try
and that's
to.
a problem when I go through comps.
I try to keep in mind that third floor square footage. I've seen some third floors that are awesome. They are like any other second floor you've seen, right? It's got a full bathroom, a bedroom, and a media room, right? But then I've seen some third floors that are a bowling alley and finished off by a couple six-packs,
Right.
your buddy down the street. And they hijack the second floor HVAC. That's awful. So.
What if the basement's like an in-law suite, but no exterior access, so it might not be an in-law suite?
Yeah, I mean, that's.
Does that get complicated?
I think it could help, the overall market ability of the property, but it's not something that you probably adjust for. I mean, it's gonna have a little kitchenette, right? Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. I think it's a positive, but when your home, this home is already $900,000.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, do you adjust 15,000 and 15,000 on 900? Does that really move the needle that much? It's really not. So.
And in Chapel Hill, I've also seen some homes that is a home, but then almost like an apartment attached to the home. It's not even an in-law suite. You might be able to put a door there, but it's a whole
ADUs.
other,
I'm telling you,
it's different.
it's getting complicated out there.
Yes.
Yeah, with these separate rental units and stuff.
Okay.
The question I had the other day was, I've got the 600 square foot ADU, how much do I add? for it. Don't hold me to it. I said, you know, what's the rent? So if the rent's $700, then maybe 100 times rent, 70 grand. And you might say, why isn't it more than that? Well, because the house has the land and everything. You're just adjusting for the ADU, not the land that it sits on. That's taken care of with the house.
Okay.
Yeah, and not everyone wants to be a landlord when they live there. So then it takes on the value of a separate office. So I try to sell the other utility that you can use it for. It could be an in-home office. An elder child could live there. You know, you could certainly rent it out to a student if you're close to a college. It has contribution because there's value there. Whether it's $700 a month,
But it's kind of where you put the contribution.
it's going to be a separate contribution
Okay.
on your CMA because it has to be separated from the gross living area.
It's kind of cool.
What, just getting into weeds on this, but like, what about when you have properties who maybe they have horse barns and things like that? Now you're going with,
Well, that's a great great question.
what's
So
the value add there?
you really have to look at this from up here and go, okay, who are my buyers? What are the market drivers here? The land is probably more important than the house. And the site improvements I've seen people buy and go, well, I'm okay with the house, but I bought it because of this. So you're looking for acreage, land improvements like the barns and the fences and all that. I'd rather that's where I'd use a comp that was 1,000 square feet smaller or larger. Because it's,
Right.
that all made up a major part of that puzzle contribution than the house. Now, so.
Got
And that's where you're going further away. That's where you might go a little bit older and close date. That's where you're finding the most comparable market drivers, which is land, site improvements, and then house might be the
Yeah.
third.